Welcome to IAS project. In this video, let's talk about later Vedic period. Previously, we have learnt that early Vedic period started around 1600 BCE and it lasted up to 1000 BCE. If we talk about the timeline of later Vedic period, then later Vedic period started around 1000 BCE and it lasted up to 600 BCE. Please note that in some books, this timeline has been given as 1100 BCE to 500 BCE. So depending on the source, we observe that plus or minus 100 years is there. However, many books write that the timeline of later Vedic period is 1000 BCE to 600 BCE. That is why in exam also we will use this timeline only, 1000 BCE to 600 BCE. So later Vedic period is basically the post-iron phase of PGW pottery phase. So far in our lectures, we did not talk about what exactly is PGW pottery. We will talk about what PGW pottery is at the end of later Vedic period. However, for now, just note that PGW pottery phase basically coincides with Vedic period. We know that Vedic period started around 1600 BCE and it lasted up to 600 BCE. Similarly, if we talk about PGW period, most of the PGW pottery belongs to 1300 BCE to 500 BCE. Please note that the latest research is pointing that PGW period started much before 1300 BCE. In fact, the latest research says that PGW period started somewhere around 2200 BCE. However, if we consider that 1300 BCE to 500 BCE was most important part of PGW period, then we can say that PGW period more or less coincided with Vedic period. Moreover, during the time period of PGW period, what happened was iron tools were made for the first time in India. And these iron tools were made somewhere around 1000 BCE for the first time. So what we can do is PGW period can be divided into two parts. The first part is the part where iron tools were not made. That is nothing but the time period between 1300 BCE to 1000 BCE. This part is basically called as pre-iron phase of PGW period. And the second part is when iron tools were made during the PGW period. So this is basically the second part from 1000 BCE to 500 BCE. And this part can be called as post-iron tools phase of PGW period. So we can say that pre-iron phase of PGW period is nothing but 1300 BCE to 1000 BCE. And this timeline basically coincides with the early Vedic period. That is why early Vedic period is a part of pre-iron phase of PGW pottery. Whereas if you look at the second part here, this time period is somewhere between 1000 BCE to 500 BCE where iron tools were used. And this timeline more or less matches with the later Vedic period timeline. That is why we call later Vedic period as post-iron phase of PGW pottery. I hope this is clear. So what was the most important event or the most important thing that happened during later Vedic period? The later Vedic period is mainly known for later Vedic literature. When we say later Vedic literature, we simply mean all the Vedic literature except Rig Veda Samhita. We know that there are 4 Vedas. They are nothing but Rig Veda, Sama Veda, Yajur Veda and Atharva Veda. So except the Rig Veda, the remaining 3 Vedas come under later Vedic texts. Moreover, later Vedic texts also include the Brahmanas, Aranyakas and Upanishads that are associated with the Veda Samhitas. We will talk about later Vedic literature in very much detail in our coming videos. If we want to study about the later Vedic period, then we mainly have 3 sources for studying this. The first source is nothing but the later Vedic literature. As I told you, later Vedic literature is nothing but Sama Veda Samhita, Yajur Veda Samhita, Atharva Veda Samhita and also the Brahmanas, Aranyakas and Upanishads that are associated with these Veda Samhitas. So all of this give us information about who were the kings during that period, what was the history like, what was social life, about economy, about polity and also religion during the later Vedic period. Moreover, we can also study about later Vedic period from archaeological evidence that we have found from PGW pottery sites. We just learnt that later Vedic period is basically the post-iron phase of PGW pottery. So iron was invented somewhere around 1000 BCE So wherever we have found PGW pottery along with iron tools, all such sites are basically a possible location for later Vedic period. That is why by studying various archaeological evidences like pottery, what was the house building, the kind of tools that were used by these people, any remains of food grains, burials, all these aspects will help us to understand the later Vedic period also. So PGW pottery sites also help us in understanding about later Vedic period. The third important source for studying later Vedic period is other literature like epics and Puranas. These are not considered as later Vedic literature because epics and Puranas were composed much later compared to Samaveda, Yajurveda and Atharva Veda. If we talk about epics, then we have two epics. They are nothing but Ramayana and Mahabharata. So although Ramayana and Mahabharata were composed much later than Samaveda, Yajurveda and Atharva Veda, Ramayana and Mahabharata also give us information about later Vedic period. Let me tell you with example. For example, Ramayana is basically the story of Rama and Sita. Ramayana says that Rama was from Kosala kingdom, whereas Sita was from Videha kingdom. Both of these kingdoms were actually kingdoms in later Vedic period. So, by studying the information that is given in Ramayana about Kosala and Videha, we can get some idea about later Vedic kingdoms of Kosala and Videha. Please note that in case of epics and Puranas, we cannot 100% take whatever is written as granted because these epics and Puranas were not composed during later Vedic period. That is, they were not composed during 1000 BCE to 600 BCE. The final compilation was done much later, probably during Gupta period, that is after 300 AD or after 300 CE. However, if we look here, later Vedic period was almost 1000 years before the compilation of epics and Puranas. That is why it is totally possible that some kind of exaggeration may have been made in these epics and Puranas. So we cannot take whatever is written in epics and Puranas 100% as granted. However, when Ramayana describes Kosala and Videha, we are definitely getting some kind of information about later Vedic kingdoms of Kosala and Videha. Similarly, we know about Mahabharata also. The major part of Mahabharata was basically the Kurukshetra war. And who were fighting in the Kurukshetra war? It was none other than Pandavas and Kauravas. Both Pandavas and Kauravas were basically members of Kuru tribe. And what is Kuru? Kuru was basically the kingdom that was existing during later Vedic period. That is why when we study about events of Mahabharata, we indirectly get the evidence of Kuru kingdom which was existing in later Vedic period. That is why although epics and Puranas were written much later than later Vedic period, they still give us information about later Vedic period. So what happened during later Vedic period? Later Vedic period mainly saw the rise of large kingdoms. Previously, in our early Vedic period lectures, we have learnt that kingdom was not very large during early Vedic period. The kingdoms were very small. Moreover, territorial concept of kingdom was not existing during that time. People of same clan or same tribe came together and then they formed a kingdom. However, in the case of later Vedic kingdoms, the kingdoms were very, very large. We will talk about important later Vedic kingdoms in the coming videos. Moreover, in the later Vedic period, Aryans also started to move towards east. Let's try to understand this on the map. So this orange colored area basically shows the location of early Vedic culture, or I can say Rig Vedic culture. So this orange location corresponds to 1600 BCE to 1000 BC. So if you look at the easternmost part of Rig Vedic culture, this was basically the area. This area is basically located near Saraswati river. This is Saraswati river. And we can also say that the eastern boundary of this area was river Yamuna and river Ganga like this. However, after 1000 BCE, what happened was these people started to move further towards east. So they crossed Yamuna river and these people settled in the Ganga Yamuna Doab. Ganga Yamuna Doab, as I told you, is basically the area that is lying between Ganga and Yamuna rivers. Then after some time, they further spread towards east. They went up to Ghagra river and eventually they crossed even Gandak river. So by the time of 600 BCE, what happened was they reached Bengal. So if we sum this up, what happened from 1000 BCE to 600 BCE was they started to move towards east, and by 600 BCE they spread up to Bengal region. So this is how Aryan spread from Indus region and Punjab region into Gangetic plains. So this is about how the Aryans moved towards east during later Vedic period. This kind of evidence has been written in later Vedic texts. Later Vedic texts say that Aryans expanded from Punjab and they moved into western part of Uttar Pradesh. Western part of Uttar Pradesh is nothing but the Ganga Yamuna Doab region. That is why we can say that the important location or the main location of later Vedic period was the Upper Gangetic Basin. Upper Gangetic Basin simply means western Uttar Pradesh as well as the adjoining areas of Punjab, Haryana and Rajasthan. When we are saying adjoining areas of Punjab, Haryana and Rajasthan, we simply mean the river Saraswati. Let me repeat this once again. Saraswati river is practically non-existent today. However, we have learnt that in Rig Veda, Saraswati river has been called as Naditarna. This shows the importance of Saraswati river to the Aryans. So initially, the main location was the Upper Gangetic Basin, that is nothing but western Uttar Pradesh and also Punjab, Haryana and Rajasthan. If we talk in terms of rivers, then we can say the area that was lying between Saraswati river, Yamuna and Ganges river was basically the most important location. So after this, what happened was Aryans expanded further east. They went into eastern Gangetic plains also. When we say eastern Gangetic plains, we are talking about eastern Uttar Pradesh and also Bihar. In eastern Uttar Pradesh, there was a kingdom called as Kosala. Whereas in Bihar, there was a kingdom called as Videha. I told you that Kosala was the kingdom of Rama, whereas Videha was the kingdom of Sita. And such expansion of Aryans into eastern Gangetic plains has been written in Shatapatha Brahmana. Please try to remember the name Shatapatha Brahmana. Shatapatha Brahmana is basically a Brahmana that is attached to Yajurveda. I will tell you exactly what Brahmanas are in the coming lectures. Please don't worry about that right now. Let's try to understand only the basics here. Okay? In Sanskrit, the word Shatapatha is basically made up of two words. Shata basically means 100 and Path basically means the English path. So Shatapatha Brahmana basically is nothing but 100 paths Brahmana. So Shatapatha Brahmana says that Aryans expanded further east into eastern Gangetic plains also. So why did Aryans expand from early Vedic region to later Vedic region? Some of the probable reasons are probably the need of water drove them towards east. We just talked about river Saraswati. We said that river Saraswati is practically non-existing today. However, during Rig Vedic period, this river was important. So slowly what happened was the river flow or the water flow in the river Saraswati started to decline. That is why these people moved towards Yamuna river and then further they moved towards Ganga river and eventually they spread up to Bengal. Another reason is land resources. We know that early Vedic Aryans were basically pastoralists. Pastoralist means they depended on grazing of their animals. So once grass was depleted in their region, they probably moved towards eastern direction. Moreover, in the regions of Uttar Pradesh and Bihar, there were many forests. The regions were less occupied. So I just told you that during 1000 BCE, iron tools were invented for the first time. So using these iron axes, what they did was they cleared the forests in Uttar Pradesh and Bihar and then they brought this land under cultivation. Another possible reason might be the population pressures that were existing in the early Vedic period region. So all these are probable reasons for Aryans moving from Punjab and western Uttar Pradesh into eastern part of Gangetic plains. How do we know this? Because in the Ganga Yamuna Doab region, we have found archaeological evidences of settlements. Moreover, we have found that these settlements were basically founded for the first time. This means that in most of the Ganga Yamuna Doab, before Vedic Aryans came, there were not many settlements. So Vedic people or the later Vedic people to be exact were the first people to settle in Ganga Yamuna Doab. So in these settlements, we have found PGW pottery. That is why these settlements are also called as PGW sites. So these PGW sites are mainly associated with later Vedic period. And later Vedic period is nothing but the start of Iron Age in India. So indirectly, we can say that PGW culture is part of Iron Age culture of Northern India. Please remember this. This is very, very important. PGW culture is associated with later Vedic period, and also PGW culture is the start of Iron Age in Northern India. What about Southern India? We will talk about that later. So since this was an Iron Age, people in these sites had knowledge of iron and also they used iron tools. With these iron tools, they were able to cut the forests that were there in western Uttar Pradesh, and by cutting down these forests, they practiced agriculture here. So what was happening in the early Vedic period region? That is nothing but the Punjab and the northwestern part of Indian subcontinent. Probably when the Aryans moved eastwards, the Punjab and northwestern India was occupied by Indo-Iranians. So these Indo-Iranians mainly came from northwest of India and they occupied the Punjab and northwestern part of Indian subcontinent. Punjab and northwestern part of Indian subcontinent simply means the early Vedic period region. That is why when we study later Vedic literature, we understand that later Vedic Aryans considered these regions with contempt, which means that later Vedic Aryans did not like the people who were living in early Vedic regions. Moreover, later Vedic literature also notes that early Vedic regions did not conduct sacrifices. That is why these early Vedic regions were considered with contempt by later Vedic people. So we can say that during later Vedic period, the people who were living in early Vedic regions were not conducting sacrifices and the Vedic culture in these regions basically declined. So if we talk about the later Vedic literature, it basically divides India into three parts. The northern part has been called as Aryavarta, which means land of the Aryans, and the central India was called as Madhya Desha, whereas the southern India was called as Dakshinapatha. So in this map, you can see some of the important kingdoms of later Vedic period. Initially, the most important later Vedic kingdoms were Kuru and Panchala. Kuru was basically located in the upper part of Ganga Yamuna Doab, whereas Panchala was located towards the middle and the bottom part of Ganga Yamuna Doab. So both Kuru and Panchala were very, very important initially. However, Kuru and Panchala declined later, and then Kosala, Videha and Kasi emerged. So you can see Kosala over here. This is basically the part of eastern Uttar Pradesh. Videha is over here. Videha is basically in Bihar. Please try to remember these five names: Kuru, Panchala, Kosala, Videha and Kasi. Initially Kuru and Panchala were there, and when they declined, Kosala, Videha and Kasi came up. You must also note that I have written some places here in red color. So Magadha, Anga, Pundra and Vanga were also existing during later Vedic period. However, in all these four kingdoms, the Aryan influence was very, very less. That is why, although these kingdoms were existing during later Vedic period, these kingdoms were not purely having a Vedic culture. So this is about the basics of later Vedic period. In our next lecture, we will talk about the later Vedic literature. Please like and subscribe. You can download this presentation from our Telegram channel. The name of the channel is IAS Project. The link for this channel has been given in the description section below. Thank you.